Hello, my name is Leona Herzog. I am the director and curator of the Buhler Gallery in St. Boniface Hospital. Today I'm going to talk to you a bit about our current exhibition, Dura Mater, Objective, Subjective. We're focused on the work of Tricia Wasney. You see her work behind me. Tricia is here to talk to you about it along with her partner, Dr. Tabrez Siddiqui. Tricia was fortunate enough to have a second partner to work with her, Dr. Sari Hannila. And now let's focus on the artists and the scientists in this wonderful exhibition.
So my work is on understanding how nerve cell connections in the brain are formed and modified with experience. And this process is involved in higher cognitive function, such as learning and memory, and these processes are frequently disrupted in neuropsychiatric disorders. We look at nerve cell connections in reduced systems, such as cell cultures, but also in animal models, and we try to understand how gene mutations or proteins that connect synapses, which are nerve cell connections, how they precipitate disorders and lead to behavioral changes.
Dr. Siddiqui and I he spoke to me about his research, and he said something that resonated with me immediately and stayed with me throughout my work on this project. He talked about how synapses work and the sort of balance between inhibitory and excitatory impulses, and how in order for a healthy situation, there needed to be, as he put it, an exquisite balance. And that idea of an exquisite balance just became a real sort of a bit of a mantra for me as I went through this project. Now, at first that was about this process in the brain, but later it became another kind of balance when I learned more about women in science and how often women were, their careers were curtailed because of their gender. And this became important to me for the work that I did. I ended up focusing on women artists, women neuroscientists, and really did a lot of research about the contributions made by women to the field.
I think it's a wonderful opportunity for artists and scientists to collaborate. We bring to the field different perspectives, and we both get to learn from each other. And I think it enriches our culture and our science. Tricia, this is fascinating. This looks like cortical layers. What were you planning to do with this? Eventually, what are you going to do with this lab coat?
Right now, I'm considering all these pieces as part of this one bigger project, which is, I called an Exquisite Balance, the whole series of works. And hopefully this will be on display somewhere else at some point. I used as inspiration for this the drawings from the Cahal, the Beautiful Brain book.
Yes.
And I based this on one of his drawings that was pyramidal neurons.
Yes.
And it's referred to in the description as a forest of pyramidal neurons, and I loved the sort of poetry in that description, so that's the title of this piece.
I must say that from a scientific perspective, it's quite an accurate depiction.
Good.
and we like to say that our work, some people like to wear it on the sleeves. Now we literally wear our work on the lab coat. So
Excellent.
This is fun. I'm really fascinated.
Thank you. Why lab coats? When I started to get this idea about an exquisite balance, referring not only to the brain's activity, but to the work of sort of gender balance in science, I thought, what better way to represent that than with something worn, something personal from the scientists. And so that's when I approached Sari, who was part of the project but wasn't working with a particular artist. She was coordinating the scientists for the whole project. And I approached Sari as a woman in neuroscience to ask if she could possibly use lab coats that I could use for my project. And I specifically wanted used ones because I wanted to show the work of the scientists and reflect the hard work that they do. And so Sari delivered in exuberance, and you can see here that I've used a lot of the stains as starting points, almost as nuclei in different areas and try to work with the existing stains as much as possible. And this coat is special as well because it illustrates research that Sari herself did, but I'll let her talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was so thrilled when you asked me to bring you lab coats, Tricia, because this is what we wear every day in the lab. This is what we work in. This is how we protect ourselves from the sometimes hazardous agents that we work with. And it's also how we protect our sometimes very sensitive materials from us. So it really is a reflection of what goes into science every single day. And this particular coat was actually worn by my lab technician. Her name is right on the tag there, Suhaila Selamat, and she did a wonderful job. And as you said, this one is very special because it does represent one of my publications, my research. I work in neural regeneration and plasticity, and this is showing the processes or neurites that are growing out of these neurons. So it's a wonderful depiction of that work, and I absolutely love it. And so all of the coats reflect, I think, the individuals who worked in them and the fields that they work in.
Right. Thank you. Well, I'm so glad you're pleased with it because, you know, I'm taking your research a little bit out of context and visualizing it in a different way, and I hope that it would make some sense, and I'm glad that it does.
No, it absolutely does, and I think also you see, when you see a lab coat empty, you think sometimes about how women leave science or women aren't represented in science. And so when you see this empty lab coat, you wonder, what did you lose when this is no longer being worn? If these are all empty, what are we missing out on as a society, as a country? What could we be doing to really reach our full potential in terms of science? Wow,
that's a great perspective that I hadn't thought of, the idea of the empty lab coat. And that's what's so interesting about these kind of collaborations is you never know where they're going to go. Mm-hmm. And you know, one thing leads to another, and different perspectives and ideas come out of it. And I'm so grateful that I had this opportunity to work with you and Tabrez on this really special project.
Oh, it was a pleasure for me as well, Tricia. And we have a lot more to see, so let's go and talk about that.
Okay, good. I worked with lab coats. The lab coats kind of represent contemporary women neuroscientists and the work that they're doing with sort of the basic building blocks of what I have learned is brain activity, the neuron. So the lab coats pretty much are embellished and include neurons. The collars, on the other hand, the collars are all made to represent specific historic women neuroscientists, and images of their research, images of the kind of research that they did. In some cases, the images are based exactly on their own images that they saw through their microscopes, and in other cases, what I could derive from other kinds of references of the kind of work that they were doing. The reason for the collars is I was gifted these collars by my partner's mom, Magnifiquement Siddiqui, and she was going to use them for a project and decided she wasn't quite sure how she was going to work with them. And she asked if I would have any use for them. And at first I didn't think I would, but I took a few into my studio. And then when I thought about it more, and I thought about the lab coats, and I thought about some other way to represent the historic scientists, I thought this was a great way because they're vintage, they kind of recall a previous era, and you know, it's interesting with the whole Ruth Bader Ginsburg phenomenon that was, you know, that collar, that standout collar has really become a symbol of feminism as well, I think, in our current time. So those things all kind of came together at the same time. And they became like these beautiful canvases for embroidery and jewelry and different pieces that I could embellish them with. The other thing I wanted to mention is this beautiful book. It's called The Beautiful Brain, and it's the work of the drawings of Santiago Ramon y Cajal, who was is considered the sort of grandfather of neuroscience. And in addition to being one of the sort of very early and amazing neuroscientists, he was an amazing artist who did both photography, drawing, all kinds of different mediums, painting as well. And I derived a lot of my images from these beautiful images in this book. They're just so evocative. And I have to really thank my artist friend Francine Martin, who alerted me to this book. It's become such an important part of this whole project for me. So as I said earlier, each of the colors represents a particular woman neuroscientist from a historic sort of point of view. I wish I could talk about all of them. Each of these artists have amazing stories. There's many, many more that I couldn't include. I just wanted to mention this fascinating scientist. Her name was Dr. Rita Levi Montalcini, and she was Italian-Jewish neuroscientist who was working during World War II, and Mussolini and the fascists really curtailed her career. She ended up moving her lab into her house. Look her up. She's fascinating. She lived to be 103 and ended up being a senator in Italy as well, and a Nobel Prize winner, by the way. There's many other amazing stories, but I think I'll just focus on this one for now. This collar is made in honor of Dr. Suzanne Corkin and Dr. Brenda Milner, and they worked on the hippocampus, which is reflected here through embroidery that I've done. And because this collar had notches in it, I took this opportunity to bead the notches and kind of refer to the fact that this is about two women. And they're sort of pointing to each other. Dr. Milner was Dr. Corkin's mentor, and they developed a lot of really important research together. Dr. Corkin was an American, now passed away. Dr. Brenda Milner, Canadian neuroscientist, currently still working at McGill at age 103. So that's pretty amazing. Yeah, so in addition to the embroidery and some of the sort of beadwork I did on the collars and the lab coats, my art practice really is strongly in a narrative jewelry discipline, where I like to tell stories through jewelry work. And so this particular lab coat, I've created something I've been wanting to create for a long time. It's called a chatelaine, and it is a Victorian era, inspired by a Victorian era piece of jewelry, but also a functional object. These chatelaines were carried by women, and they would have hanging from their chains things like sewing kits, keys, different things that the woman of the chateau would need to complete her day. Later on, there were nurses' chatelaines, and there's some really fascinating images of this online if you want to take a look. I wanted to make a chatelaine that was not necessarily functional, but in this case shows the growth of a neuron. So it shows the development of a neuron from a little blob here to its full expression with all of its parts. And I also on this piece made neuron buttons for the lab coat. I replaced the buttons that were on with these neurons.
Today, you have taken a tour of the work of artist Tricia Wasney. Tricia, I'd like to thank you very much for coming and spending time with us today and touring us through your beautiful works. Thank you. I would also like to thank Dr. Tabrez Siddiqui and Dr. Sari Hannila. And everyone, I want you to watch our website so that you know when we're open again and can visit us in person. Until then.